Welcome back. Let's see here. Jerry, watching Free Speech TV on a Roku box in Sun City, Arizona. Jerry, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm calling about, I live in Arizona, probably the worst state in voter accountability. So what I'm doing here is I've cut off funding to the Democratic Party until they can prove that they've contacted the people that were purged in the last election. And my question to you, what are you doing about the purge list in your state?
Yeah, Jerry, so, the interstate cross-check conversation comes up, Tom, I think almost every week I've been on, and, we have taken that to heart. And what we are actually currently doing is putting some legislation together to try to address it. Now, again, being very pragmatic, this is a Republican-run Congress. These were Republican initiatives to make it so that fewer people could get out to vote. So I'm not optimistic that's going to fly through Congress with great margins. But I think it allows us to raise the level of talking about this issue, and that there actually will be federal legislation trying to look at this. But I completely agree. When you've got the ability to take people off of lists for very shaky reasons and make it harder for people to vote, honestly, that's why Keith Ellison and I have introduced a constitutional amendment to guarantee a right to vote in the Constitution so that it's harder for states and communities to make it more difficult to vote. And if we deal with that, you're dealing with it at a 30,000-foot level. But I understand your frustration, Jerry, but let's just all I'll add is let's always remember who maybe the enemy is on this stuff. Sometimes I think we have a chance. We accidentally shoot some of our friends along the way and realize that the real issue is there are some people who want to make it harder to vote, and we need to keep our focus on those people.
Right. Jimmy in Parkton, North Carolina, watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Congressman. All right. I'm just a frustrated veteran, I guess. On last evening, watching the news, I heard the Commander-in-Chief literally give the location and describe almost to a T the type of ships, and in this case, the submarines that were on their way to North Korea. While in the service, it was strictly against rules to disclose your location to anybody, even in a letter to someone back home. And to see the Commander-in-Chief doing it on television in such a way was an affront to me. I was screaming at the television set. My question to you is, how is the Congress able to deal with an individual like this who is willing to aggrandize and put men and women's lives in danger for what? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, Jimmy, I feel your pain, and, I think it's the pain we have every day when, honestly, we get the 140 characters when you do. This is how we hear about things from this administration. And, it's an administration that's largely on training wheels, and they're still falling down even on the training wheels. And in this case, things that, like you said, you weren't ever allowed to share that information in order to be able to protect the people who are defending this country. And when a president who doesn't have any experience in this area is starting to all of a sudden be the commander-in-chief and then makes rookie mistakes that are dangerous to the people that are involved, we have this frustration. That's why, we want him to do what the law says, and that means come to Congress and get our authorization when you're doing things. And it's just one of the many ways, hopefully, we can try to address this amateur or actions that we see coming out of the president.
John in West Lynn, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM out of Portland. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman and Tom. My question on trade is a lot of the farmers, especially dairy farmers in Wisconsin, are finding out certain countries like Canada and China are unwilling to buy their milk starting this year. And it's like, isn't this like payback in advance for what the president has threatened? And doesn't he understand that there is a two-way street in trade?
Yeah, hi, John. So let me take the issue a little broad when it comes to trade. We are watching a president who gave a lot of easy answers during the campaign that sounded good, but he had zero solutions to what he actually meant by those. We're not seeing him move proactively in this agenda. He promised that he was going to renegotiate NAFTA, and we're seeing something quite different than that. We've seen a bunch of false promises around trade, and when he talks about things like a border adjustment tax or other issues, it's going to work counterproductive, I think, to how trade really should be done. And you're right. I mean, you're going to see a lot of countries, I think, trying to push in various areas, and we're not quite sure where his trade policy is and where, of course, the Republican majority in Congress is, because I would argue Paul Ryan is in if not a 180-degree different place, it's probably a 160-degree different place than the president at least claims he's at, and I think the president will start going closer to Paul Ryan's area. So, the Democrats, in the meantime, we've been sitting down with people like Lori Wallach, who's, I think, one of the national experts on trade, coming up with a much better proactive vision of where trade should be going in the future, and we're going to keep putting that forward. But in the meantime, you're going to see this amateur hour administration on training wheels operation on trade, and you're going to find inconsistencies. You're going to find things that were counterproductive to what he said he was going to do. It's because they don't know what they're doing, and there's so many people in that administration who have no experience. This is just part of what we're all going to have to suffer through together.
Wow. Andy, I agreed, but wow. Andy in Grand Rapids, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman and Tom. Hey, you guys. Congressman, is there any possible way that you guys are working on possibly financing down-ticket races from the federal level?
Sure. So, Andy, I don't know about financing per se. I mean, you've got the Democratic National Committee, and I know that Keith Ellison, one of his major focuses is constantly, I mean, it's been, for decades, how you get us to use our resources as members of Congress to help elect people up and down the ticket. And in fact, one of the things that the Progressive Caucus does when we endorse someone for Congress is we ask them to commit to try to help raise turnout 3% in their district every cycle, because we want people to be focusing on that grassroots. So while groups like the Progressive Caucus, absolutely, it's part of our DNA in trying to do that, I'm hoping that how this new DNC will transform is in a way that does that and have that, I guess, for lack of a better term, the 50-state strategy. Here in Wisconsin, I've been going around the state recommending we have someone run in every single state legislative seat that's going to be up next year, because it's important to do that for turnout, but also you're going to have surprises in elections, and people are certainly not happy. When you look at Kansas yesterday, that's a huge swing of percent of people who voted for Trump by over 25 points or so in that district, and instead it was decided by single digits. A lot of people are not happy with that, and we need to make sure that we're electing people in every level and every office and take advantage of that going into 2018. So I think some of us have always focused on that, Andy. I'm hoping the DNC will focus on that, but it's important that people run for local office and state office, because generally that's the pipeline to higher office, and that's where we can have the greatest impact.
Bob in Los Angeles, you're on with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. Has Congress just forgotten about what the lie that Jeff Sessions told? That just really just trips my trigger. And the second thing is anybody keeping track every time when the president goes to Mar-a-Lago, Secret Service and his whole staff is being housed there, and we're putting it with the taxpayer dollar? I'll take my answer off radio.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, Bob, great questions. I'll tell you, one of the real challenges we have is, it used to be every few days something would happen and you'd be addressing it. These days with President Trump and his administration, every few hours something new happens, and it does seem that you can kind of lose focus, and you have to keep focused on something as important as an attorney general who lies to the American people by lying to Congress under oath about having contacts with Russian officials when there has been interference in our elections. So while there were calls for him to have to leave that job, you're right. The press has seemed to move to a lot of other issues, and quite honestly, we have too. And it's a good point that we got to keep our eye on something as important as that. Secondly, it's $3.6 million every time the president goes to Mar-a-Lago. He's about to already hit what Barack Obama spent in a year taking trips. I think I read he was on his 15th round of golf since he's become president, and yet we're going to cut Meals on Wheels, and we're going to cut Pell Grants, and we're going to cut a bunch of programs that really help people in this country. Absolutely, we're keeping track, and we need to keep that in focus, because if this is a guy who, he's used to a very lavish lifestyle, but you can't be costing taxpayers that, and then also money in New York as residents there that's costing the people of New York City, and then all the other expenses we're having for his family as they travel. All important points to keep our eye on.
Thom, in Iron Springs, Arizona, you're on with Congressman Pocan. Thom?
Yes.
Yeah, you're on the air.
Hi, Congressman. Congressman, I was just wondering, can we ever get rid of the Electoral College? Can you do that in Congress?
Absolutely. In fact, there is a bill right now I know that's moving forward on trying to do that. Again, in this Congress, it will not happen. But any good idea, and I can tell you this from 23 years now experience in government, you have to start somewhere, and building the grassroots support and organizational support in order to get an idea to happen. And I see this happen every time we put a progressive caucus budget out. Ideas that we put out there now become the mainstream ideas that Bernie and Keith and others have put out there are now the mainstream policies. Has to be tested somewhere. And in this case, Electoral College, having two recent elections where the majority of people in the country didn't elect the president, is a time we have to say, does this still make sense for this country? And I'm someone who thinks it's time to reform that, and we're going to try to have that conversation with the American people to build the support we need to.
So we just have a minute till the end of the show, or the end of the hour. Would you do that by amending the Constitution, or I know that there's this effort by a whole bunch of states to say, if our state hits a certain threshold, then, or if the number of electors is hit, I don't remember the details of it, but basically it would do the same thing.
Yeah. To me, Thom, the most important thing is to raise the issue and say that we can do it and should we do it, and raise that public debate about it. The exact vehicle at this point won't matter because we're not in charge. But what does matter is that we're elevating this to a public conversation so that the people across the country can say, does this still make sense in a 2017 America?
Right. Final thoughts for the week?
People have been amazing in reaching out to their representatives and working with groups. Keep it up. We're winning. We are winning, and even though there's bad things that happen because elections have consequences, we're fighting back, and I am still very optimistic on where we're heading with the people keeping their activism going. That's great. That's great. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan, MarkPocan. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today. Of course, Thom. Thank you. Always a pleasure having you on. We will be back right after this.